Hey everybody, this is Owen from Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast, and before we get into the action today, I wanted to take a few seconds to talk about Anchor. Anchor is a great app and it is free to use. It's the easiest way to make a podcast. Did I mention it's free? There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will even distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. That's the Anchor app or anchor.fm to get started today. Happy podcasting. And now, let's get into it.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Owen Rock and Metal Podcast. My name is Owen. Welcome to episode number 3. Today, we are talking about what some would say is probably one of the greatest albums in rock and roll history. That is Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction. Joining me on the program today, folks, is my mom, Stacy Wisniewski. Stacy, Mom, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. This is my first ever podcast, so I'm kind of excited.
Yeah, as you know, I'm new to the podcasting world too, and I'm happy to have you on. I think of you as someone who's got some expertise on the subject, so hopefully we can have you on again if this goes well. So let's get into it. Guns N' Roses. You a fan? Let's tell the world what your thoughts are on Guns N' Roses in general.
I think Guns N' Roses is one of the greatest rock bands of all time. They made a huge impact in the 80s, which is my coming-of-age music era. So Appetite for Destruction was an impressive album. You can listen to it from beginning to end. All 12 tracks are excellent, so they are fantastic.
So you're a big fan of Guns N' Roses, and you kind of raised me the same way. I feel the same way. Definitely the impact of this album and the quality of this album is definitely top tier. So why don't we go ahead and get into it? Let's go through the tracks. Let's just go through the album and let's break it down for the listener and let's just discuss it. Let's have fun with this. So obviously you got the big tracks. Everybody knows your Welcome to the Jungles, your Paradise City, your Sweet Child of Mine. I think everybody agrees those are all great. Now, personally, I would like to think of this album as kind of a spotless record. As you mentioned to, as you alluded to, there's no real blemishes. You can listen to it front to back with no problems, no skips or anything like that. And I kind of feel the same way. But outside of, the singles, like Welcome to the Jungle, Paradise City, Sweet Child of Mine, what are some of the tracks that you think are kind of underrated by your average rock listener?
I don't think that there is truly a track on here that's underrated by a listener because it is such an excellent album. But I don't think It's So Easy, Anything Goes, Rocket Queen, they don't get the attention that they deserve because, like you said, Welcome to the Jungle, Paradise City, Sweet Child of Mine, those are so popular. And actually, Sweet Child of Mine is their only number one single ever.
Really? So that's kind of interesting to note because you'd think, if you've ever been to a sporting event or any kind of thing like that, you've probably heard Welcome to the Jungle blasted over the loudspeaker at least once. But Sweet Child of Mine, me being a guitar player, definitely you hear that in guitar stores across the country. It's a very popular riff, and there's nothing wrong with that being the number one song. I definitely am a fan of that track, but the other songs not being number one, that's kind of surprising. It's kind of interesting to know. But my tracks that I think are kind of underrated, I am a really big fan of It's So Easy and Night Train as well. I think those two just really, I don't know, just captured the kind of energy that Guns N' Roses had, kind of just kind of like Rebels, kind of like punks in a way, but not like punk music. It's different. It's more aggressive almost, like a different sound to it. And as you said, this was your era when you were coming about. So what was it like when Guns N' Roses was coming on the scene? What was their image? How were they viewed?
So this album was released in July of 87. So that was right before my senior year of high school. And actually, when I was preparing for this, I was looking into it a little bit, and it didn't take off right away. It only sold 200,000 albums in the first couple of months, and they were really trying to push it because Guns was really popular on the Strip, and Troubadour and the Roxy and playing all those clubs.
Uh-huh.
And David Geffen is who, signed them.
Right.
And they wanted to get this album in radio rotation and get it on MTV, because back then MTV played actual videos and music. And MTV wouldn't do it. So Geffen got on the phone with them and said, I need you to play this video for Welcome to the Jungle. And they said, okay, we'll do it once. And they did it at 4 a.m. So they played that song. And luckily, a few people saw it, started calling in, yes, please play this. And then Sweet Child of Mine came on the scene. And that was when a lot more people started listening to them, because it was a little bit more gentle song. So their fan base got broader. And actually, Slash hates that song.
Oh, really? He's not a fan of Sweet Child of Mine. Well, that's interesting. And bouncing off kind of what you said, when it was released in 87, it was hard for them to get through at first. I'd also read that. And at the time, other things that were going on in music, I believe Aerosmith was kind of making a comeback. I think it was the record Permanent Vacation. Def Leppard's Hysteria was getting a lot of radio play at the time. I think U2 had some stuff that was getting big MTV play and radio play. So there was kind of not a saturated market, but there was competition there that Guns N' Roses had to compete against. And I don't know about you, but between, Aerosmith, Def Leppard, and U2, I would definitely put Guns N' Roses above all of those bands in my eyes. But I could see how people would differ in opinion on that.
I think by the late 80s, a lot of the hair bands were starting to become very commercialized. So these, with maybe the exception of like Motley Crue, these guys coming on the scene, they were having a hard time getting the radio stations to buy in, MTV to buy in. So they weren't getting that airplay, because you got to remember there's no internet back then.
Right. So MTV and radio was the medium.
Was the thing. Yeah. Yeah. So it was hard for them at first, but about a year later, that record really just smashed through, and it's the 11th best-selling album of all time.
Yeah, in the United States, selling album of all time. It sold over 30 million copies worldwide. It's really remarkable. And I mean, just thinking about the cover art alone, that iconic, the skull, the members with the skulls and, over the cross. And it's iconic imagery, in my opinion. Just the album cover, people see it, and if they're a rock fan, or even not even a rock fan, just a music fan in general, they likely know the band and they know the songs, because that's how big of an impact it had. And do you remember, the first time when you heard this album?
Well, when you graduated from high school back then, your class kind of had a song that, tied everyone together. And, some people would use like Turn the Page by Bob Seger and things like that. And my class totally caught on to this Welcome to the Jungle. And it just was perfect for that time period. You're going out into the world, you're making changes, welcome to the jungle. So it was a big deal to have that album come out at that time. There was parties and everybody was getting ready to go off to college. It was excellent. But, talking about the album cover, the original artwork for that album was from a painting, and it was called Appetite for Destruction. And it's very gory and bloody, and girl with her top ripped open, and kind of some aliens. And Geffen and the record stores, the salespeople said absolutely not.
Right.
So and that's why they came up with that cross with the guys on it.
Right, because definitely when you're a band who's kind of bursting onto the scene and you're trying to get that airplay and those views and those listens, having a more graphic cover art is going to kind of it will hurt your chances of getting those views, especially when you're trying to break into the mainstream. So, I think, history would definitely say making the change to the cover was beneficial, but who knows what it would be different if they would not have changed the cover. But it's interesting to think about that. But a big way that Guns N' Roses, when they were first starting out, you kind of alluded to this, playing in the LA clubs and the LA scene, that was a big deal. That's how, they kind of got their name around, and they were, from what I've heard, definitely big time on the LA club scene, one of the best groups out there, and obviously they hit the mainstream. So you've seen Guns N' Roses live in concert? Yes? No?
Yes.
Yes. So
I've seen them 4 times.
4 times. So have you ever? So this Guns N' Roses, over the years, for those listeners who don't know, they've gone through some lineup changes. So this original lineup on Appetite, that's kind of considered by many, the real Guns N' Roses, the core Guns N' Roses, whatever you want to consider it. Did you ever see this iteration of Guns N' Roses?
I have seen this. With Izzy and Steven Adler, traded in and out, but Axel, Slash, and Duff are kind of regarded as the mainstays there.
Mm-hmm.
So I've seen Axel with some other guys, and then I've seen Axel with all the rest. Izzy and Steven were brought in and out in the Not in This Lifetime tour.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I've seen them all the ways. I think Axel is honestly, he is the band.
Really?
And a lot of people would disagree with me about that. But I have seen other people take, Slash's place. I've seen other people take Duff's place, and they are amazing.
Yeah, definitely a podcast topic, could happen down the line, best frontman. And I know Axel's name gets tossed around in that conversation. Where do you think Axel stands in some of the great frontmen of all time? Do you think he's deserving of that praise? Do you think he's up there in those ranks?
I think the thing that has hurt him is, his attitude, and then he would, be late, and he was kind of argumentative a lot. But yeah, I think he is fantastic. His musical range is vast. He fronted for AC/DC.
Yeah.
He played some tracks there that, Brian Johnson didn't play because he didn't have the vocal range for them. So yeah, Axel's amazing.
Yeah. And, while we're talking about him, I think yesterday was his 59th birthday. So everybody here at the Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast sending a late happy birthday to Mr. Axl Rose. And, definitely thankful kind of for the great music that has come out of his work over the years. A lot of the music off this album, I believe he had writing credits on. It was from him, but I believe it was a kind of a collaborative effort as well. I'm not sure if you have any light to shine on that, but
they were very collaborative in writing their music, is what I understand. Slash said that Welcome to the Jungle took, about 3 hours to write. They wrote Paradise City on one of their first, tours when they went up to Seattle, both as they were forming. So yeah, I think they did a lot together. And one of the tidbits I found out was, when Axel was growing up, he was only allowed to listen to classical music, which just seems wild. And at school, he actually, and you'll get a kick out of this since you're such a big Zeppelin fan, at school, maker. And that was it for him. He was absolutely enthralled with rock and roll from then on.
That's really interesting. I think that the fact that they were very collaborative and they worked together a lot, that's cool. And that's something, as a guy who's kind of aspired to be in a band, that's kind of the life you picture. You're hanging out with your bandmates and you're just writing and you're making music and you're having a great time. And the Guns N' Roses definitely did have a great time. A lot of partying, a lot of drugs and alcohol on the scene at the time, and that's definitely something they're known for. I believe, there was an instance, I think, where Slash, his heart had stopped for at least 7 minutes or something like that. The stories from back in the day, and this wasn't really at the time when Appetite was released. It was more once they got famous and a few years down the line, them showing up incredibly late for shows, and that's kind of when the cracks kind of start to form and the bands kind of starts to fall apart. But, their run that they had there from, Appetite through the Use Your Illusion records, they were really, you could speak better to this than I could, but they were really one of the top acts in music at the time. Am I right in thinking that?
I think they fell apart quicker than anybody would have wanted them to. There was just a lot of pandemonium between the members, people quitting. They were late. They had some homophobic lyrics. Axel would fight people. They had violence at their concerts. So they just had a lot of, bad flavor following them around, which is unfortunate for them. And people thought that they would never get back together, and they thought they would never see it. So when they got back together, for Not in This Lifetime tour, it was phenomenal. And they toured for 3 years, and the pandemic, I'm sure, put an end to that. So it'll be interesting to see if they pick it back up, because they were supposedly writing new music.
Oh, really? Well, I mean, out of this pandemic, there's a great possibility that a lot of new music would come out. So if a new Guns N' Roses record comes out, I'm sure many people out there would jump to go get it, and I'm sure you and I would do just the same. We would listen to it. But yeah,
Absolutely.
the album. I mean, it's really just a quintessential album in my opinion. Just perfect album. You can't say enough good things about Appetite for Destruction. And I think, if you're someone who's, just kind of wants to get into rock music or wants to get into Guns N' Roses specifically, there's no better starting point than Appetite for Destruction. And really, you might not find anything better than Appetite for Destruction, which is really, it just stands to the testament. And for that to be a band's first album, like that's the first thing that comes out under their name, is even more impressive.
Yeah, it's absolutely phenomenal what they did with that album, because they just got together in like 85, and then in 87 that came out. And I don't know if you knew this, but they needed somebody to produce that album, and so they contacted Paul Stanley from Kiss. And Izzy was a huge fan, so the other guys weren't really too interested, but they did it, hey, we'll do Izzy this favor. And Paul wanted to make some changes, and of course the other guys weren't too into that, so Paul didn't get the job. But I thought that was neat, being a big Kiss fan too, that Paul Stanley was a little bit involved in that.
That's interesting. And for the viewers, or the listeners rather, who don't know, that my mom and I are big Kiss fans, and we will definitely have future episodes where we talk about Kiss. So if you are a Kiss fan, you'll want to listen back in for those when they come out down the line. But that's really interesting. I'm not sure. While we're on the topic of Paul Stanley and Guns N' Roses, I believe there was kind of a beef at some point. I think he mentioned it in his book, which I haven't read in its entirety, but I know you have. Do you know anything about potential Paul Stanley and Guns N' Roses beef at any point?
There was something about a recommendation of a guitar for Slash or something like that, and I think Paul just had a bad taste in his mouth, probably after dealing with them, because I think they were a lot of trouble and just bad boys. And Paul was obviously more advanced in the rock world at that time, and just in his life in general. And I think Paul was just basically like, fuck off, not happening. So I think that's where a little bit of the bad taste came from, is starting out with this, I'm not going to hire you to be our producer because we don't agree with the changes you want to make. And then, oh yeah, I want to borrow a guitar from you. So
right. Yeah, and that instance, that kind of sounds like, kind of how their image was at the time, kind of just like a rough group of guys, and that's kind of how their music was portrayed. And you were speaking about the production of it. Metallica, who I'm a big fan of, after this album was released, because at the time it was released in 87, and Metallica's Master of Puppets was released in 1986. And for the album after Master of Puppets, Metallica wanted to go for kind of the aggression that was portrayed on Appetite for Destruction. And I think, you can definitely hear it, especially in the lyrics, and, just kind of the feel of the songs, the aggression that Guns N' Roses is trying to portray. And I think that just speaks to their kind of where they were in their lives, their careers, and just kind of like, I mean, I don't know a whole lot about their personal backgrounds, but I'm guessing, they're kind of not struggling, but they're musicians trying to make it big, and they're just playing clubs, and they want to be, selling out arenas. So of course there's going to be some aggression and some really drive to get to the top. And that's going to come with, an attitude of just kind of like, fuck the world, fuck all this. Like, we're going to do it our way, and I think that's great. And I think a lot of people, kind of tuned into that when, the record hit the shelves. But yeah.
Axl's name, actually, it's kind of fun. His name is William Bailey. So his name was Billy Bailey, and he's from Indiana. And when he was growing up, he was in a lot of, juvenile delinquent trouble. And he knew when he started to, become 18 and of age to actually go to real jail, he knew he had to get the heck out of there or he was going to end up, in prison for a long time. So he headed to LA, and Izzy is his friend from the same town, and they went together and they actually formed Guns N' Roses.
That's really cool. A guy, Billy Bailey from a small town, becomes rock and roll legend Axl Rose. That just shows, anybody can make it if you're in the right spot. And, the LA, kind of going back to the LA music scene at the time, Guns N' Roses was a big time band. But do you know of any other big time bands coming out of LA? It was Motley Crue LA based, right?
Yeah, Motley Crue, Van Halen. Those are, two of the really big ones that kind of took over the Strip for a while. Everybody knows, Motley Crue's history. They're just bad boys.
Watch the Dirt,
yeah, stripped together is just something else. But so that the Sweet Child of Mine is about Axl's first wife.
Oh, I didn't know that. I mean, I knew it was obviously about a lady and a love interest of sort, but I didn't know it was that personal of a song for Axl Rose.
Yeah, her name's Erin Everly, and her dad is from the Everly Brothers. So, they were a big band back in like your grandparents' time. Yeah, and this is actually kind of funny. So she was there when they were filming the video, of course, so she could be in the video. And David Bowie appears to watch them making this video. And when I see this, I'm like, why would David Bowie be there? And David Bowie had actually dated Slash's mom.
What?
And he came out to check out because Slash was born in England. His name is Saul Hudson, which is wild. But so David Bowie's there watching them make this video for Sweet Child of Mine, and he starts, I guess, flirting, the story goes, with Erin Everly, who is, Axl's wife. And Axl, hot-tempered redhead that he is not having any of that and starts trying to throw punches with David Bowie. So, he's had beef with a lot of people too, but to hear that he had some with David Bowie is
that is crazy. And, talking, this whole episode I've been talking about, the bad boy image, and, they're living up to it, to give him credit, trying to throw hands with David Bowie, and, it's interesting. But I did not know Slash was from the UK and his real name's Saul. That's interesting. I guess, you got Billy Bailey and Saul, and they're one of the greatest duos in rock history. That's really interesting. That's interesting trivia to know. But yeah, I mean, yeah.
And, you've talked a little bit about, the album being, kind of a tough image and that sort of thing. And when that came out on vinyl, instead of having an A side and a B side, they had a G side and an R side. There was a Guns side with some of the rougher songs that they thought were, that image. And then the Roses side, was Sweet Child of Mine and Think About You.
Yeah, actually, while you say that, I have my copy of the vinyl right in front of me. And, if we go down the G side for the listeners, it's Welcome to the Jungle, It's So Easy, Night Train, Out to Get Me, Mr. Brownstone, and Paradise City. And I mean, Welcome to the Jungle, it's about what? Like the tough, world, that's what the jungle represents. Yep. I mean, Mr. Brownstone, that's about heroin. I mean, it's all...
Night Train's about cheap alcohol.
And then, we go to side R. My Michelle, Think About You, Sweet Child of Mine, You're Crazy, Anything Goes, and Rocket Queen, Sweet Child of Mine, Think About You, My Michelle. Those are all kind of songs with themes of like love and, about a significant other. And so that's interesting that, I noticed that there was a side G and a side R, but I didn't really connect it to the themes and the content of those songs. And
I think that's interesting because they were very purposeful.
Right.
With
yeah.
that,
I mean, I'm sure that a lot of bands have kind of laid out the framework of an album, the whole concept of what it even is a concept album, which I'm not saying Appetite is a concept album, but concept albums are albums that are laid out, tracks in a certain order, so it flows. And kind of a similar thing here going on with the tracks laid out on certain sides to reflect, the Gun side and the Roses side, and comes together to make one of the greatest albums in rock history for sure. Yeah, so
They had a lot of tracks, I guess, ready to go for this album, and they chose not to put them on, like "Don't Cry" and
oh, really?
"Blue
Yeah.
Rain," because they don't want too much, slow, emotional songs taking over this album. So they left those off, and obviously we know those songs, so they've been included on other albums in the band's history. But those were ready to go. So imagine having the entire Appetite list of tracks, and then November Rain
Yeah,
and Don't
and I
Cry on
mean
top.
November Rain, like just look at the music video on YouTube and just look at the views it has. That's an incredibly popular song. And Don't Cry is honestly, it's one of their more underrated songs, and I know you're a big fan of that song. So that would have been that would have made this album even more star powered if interesting to think, what difference it would have made, to included those songs. So,
but I do think it would have watered it down. I think they were right to hold off on those songs because the power of, the jungle and It's So Easy, Anything Goes, those were just rock and roll at its finest. So I'm glad they left them
right,
off
yeah,
for another
for
time.
sure. And I've heard some demo tapes of November Rain and from like 86, 85, and it definitely doesn't reflect the same kind of November Rain that you hear on Use Your Illusion 1. And I think, that kind of space between when they first had the idea to when it was actually released maybe advanced the song, further its development, and added all kinds of things that happened in the songwriting and the producing process. And I think that was ultimately good for the song. So, as you know, we've discussed the album in length. We've discussed the band's background at length. So, talking about Appetite for Destruction, Guns N' Roses' debut album, what would you rate it out of 10? 10 out of 10.
10.
10 out of 10. Perfect. I'm going to be right there with you. I'm going to say it's a 10 out of 10 as well. I think, call me biased, call me whatever, there are no blemishes on this album. I can listen to all these songs and enjoy them. We talked about there's a softer side, but none of them are soft per se. They're just kind of different topics, so to speak. They're still kind of in your face and, raring guitars and, big sounds all at the same time. And it's great music, and it's music that everybody who's a so-called rock fan should definitely know. Even if you're not a rock fan, you should know a few of these songs because they're just that iconic.
Yeah, it is 58 minutes and 21 seconds of perfection. I am a skipper, so I, skip tracks all the time, but I will listen to this album
Absolutely. So, any final thoughts on the album before we send it off here? Anything, any last second things, anything else you want to say about the album or Guns N' Roses in general before we wrap it up here?
If you don't have this album, you need to get this album because it is one of the best albums of all time. If you are a rock fan, it has to be in your collection.
Absolutely.
Without a doubt.
I know when I saw this copy on vinyl, for those who don't know, I collect vinyls. When I saw it in the record store, I knew I had to have it just because of how iconic it is. Well, ready to wrap things up here on episode 3 of Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast. We talked about Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction here with my mom today. Thanks so much for coming on the program, Mom. We hope to have you back. We'd love it if you could come back and talk about some other stuff. Perhaps Foo Fighters' new album, Medicine at Midnight, which is pretty good, I will say. And we'd love to have you back. So that's going to just about do it here for us folks on episode 3 of Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast. Be sure to follow on Instagram, Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast, to get the latest updates on, what special episodes we're doing, what we've got coming up next, and you can give me feedback there as well. And that's going to do it for this one. Thanks for listening, and as always, never stop rocking.